Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. This is the Etape tour video and I managed to pull off a top 20 finish. Now before we get any further, just a really quick favour to ask if you can help me get to 30,000 subscribers. We are really nearly there, and if you just subscribe, comment down below and just like this video, and if the video gets 3,000 likes for 30,000 subscribers, I'll celebrate with a special challenge video. So the Etape tour, it followed stage 18, I think, of this year's Tour de France 2025. So this video is going to be all about my perspective from being at the very front of the Etape tour, because, well, I don't think there really is many first-hand experiences out there, especially as far as I can see on YouTube, that have shown what it's like to be at the front. It was 130 kilometers with 4,500 meters of elevation gain. My goal was a top 15 for this event. I'm really proud of my performance during this event because I think I did some of my best numbers to be in with a chance of staying at the very front with some of the best climbers. So I'm gonna delve into my story, but first I wanna talk about the numbers and break this event down a little bit to give you some perspective. There's 16,000 participants. Now you could argue this thing is not a race, but at the very front, there's always going to be some element of racing. And the type of riders that show up to do these events, they certainly are some of the best Grand Fondo riders in Europe, possibly the world, because they take these things really seriously. So let's break down the numbers. My moving time was 4 hours, 35 minutes. My average power was 267 watts, and my normalized power was just 1 watt shy of 300. We accumulated a total workload of 4,400 kilojoules with a total TSS of just over 300. My average heart rate was 158 and my maximum was 174. Now that you know the numbers, I want to take you through the story and how it all played out from my perspective. So grab yourself that coffee or popcorn, put it on a big screen and enjoy. So we'll kick the story off the day before, because all great plans start 24 hours before. At least that's what I tell myself. Now, I was out here on this trip with Alp Cycles, the tour operator that I put my full trust in. And I went to see them the day before to hand them a couple of bottles that I would be needing the following day in my private feed stations, which, if you don't know, the event has event feed stations that you can stop at and get water and food and etc. But then when you go with the tour operator, you can have private feeds and they'll be in different locations, sometimes more advantageous locations. So 2 of mine were at the top of the Col du Pré, and then one about 500 meters in to the bottom of the final climb to Plagne. Now I actually also had Charlie. She was positioned somewhere else on the course as well, which allowed me to have a third and a bonus feed. Just so you know, all the folks in pretty much the front of the event have their own private feed, so they don't have to stop. So that evening, we actually stealth camped in Albertville, which was the start of the Etape tour. And myself and Charlie had a wonderful, romantic picnic evening meal on a park bench, while some other campers decided to roll in and also spend the night next to us. Now this was a really good location because it meant that the following morning I only had like a 5-minute ride to get to the start line. And I was starting in wave 0, which is technically the first wave. It sets off at 7 AM. And I think the last wave was a good couple of hours after it, maybe about 9 AM. And I got chatting to a couple of people on the start line, as you do, and bumped into a fellow British cyclist. And we shared some nervous pre-event chat. Oh, here's the start line. People have been here bright and early. What's it like being at the front, I wonder? And then the gun went off and we started. We were away and straight down a main, kind of like a motorway for the first 5 to 10 kilometers towards Eugene. Now, I didn't capture it on the camera, but there was a big crash in front of me on this road. And I don't know what it is. If you saw the Mont Ventoux video, you'll know that I got caught up in a crash there as well. So at the minute, I seem to attract them. Although thankfully, I didn't get involved in this one. Although what did happen was I was drinking at the time and in my panic, I just dropped my bottle to grab my brakes. That did mean I'd lost a bottle, crucially, with 60 grams of carbohydrate and electrolytes in. So that was a bit of a bummer. Now we hit the first climb, 11.3k, and this took us just 26 minutes and 45 seconds with an average speed of 25 kilometers an hour. My average power was around about 330 watts, which is a fair amount of power for that duration, but obviously you're in a really fresh state. Now, I had to make quite a considerable effort on this climb because I needed to get to the very front. Although I started in the first wave, you'd be forgiven for thinking I wasn't at the very front. There's still at least 1,000 riders there. So I made my way through the group, and eventually I got fairly close just before we did the first descent, which was a really twisty and quite a difficult descent to do. But it was only for 4 minutes. That's all we were going downhill for. And there was a couple of moments where people got a couple of the corners wrong and their feet were out and they were just trying to get around the corner as best as possible. But thankfully, I didn't see any issues on that descent. Now, we got to the next climb, which was the Saisies, or at least the crest of Roselend, up through that side. And they'd repaved the road because of course the Tour de France is coming through in a couple of days' time. And this climb, because it was all strung out on that 4-minute descent, I had to give it some big gas in the first couple of K to close the gap to make sure I was still in that front split. Because what was now happening was people were coming out of the back of that front group. And you can see it happening in front of you. You can see the long line and you can see, gaps between the groups, and you just have to think, right, hopefully that front group is gonna maybe slow down and then eventually I'll be able to get to them. Now, thankfully, they were doing a bit of attacking and then slowing down and attacking by the looks of it. And I was gradually making my way through some riders that were getting dropped. And eventually, after putting in a fairly big effort, I think it was around 360 watts for 17 minutes. Now, bearing in mind my FTP at the minute is probably around 370, 380. I was really borderline on the limit there. However, I did feel pretty good. So I knew at that point that I was on a good day because the numbers were high, but it didn't feel like they were high. This set the stage really for what was to come. Now, getting to that group required a lot from me, but I was now there. And that is the key thing, because now that I'm there, I can keep an eye on what's happening and I can respond to any attacks or choose to ride my own tempo and know that I'm still now really close to the front. And I know who's in this group. There's lots of riders who are pretty much like always on the Gran Fondo circuit, very good climbers, and they basically love doing these events. Lots of elevation gain, hard riding the whole day. So who would join us then on that climb at the top, near the top, would be Jack Burke, who I'm sure many of you have heard of, who has taken a fair few Strava KOMs of late, and GCN's very own Andrew Feather, and former British hill climb champion. I think we've made it to the front group. We're an hour in, 321 watts normalised. There's some serious power in this front group. Stalemate currently. We were together in this group and there was about 20 of us, 30 of us going over the top of the Saisies. And as we were getting to the top, I sensed a lull and I decided to attack. And it was me and 2 other riders going over the top of the Saisies on our own. And I thought, this is not going anywhere. We'll just get caught in the descent, but at least we've got some momentum. And cresting the top, I looked down and I could see that this climb, which was 13.7k, it took us 40 minutes and I'd averaged 333 watts. So obviously the first half had been really intense, close to 350, 360, and then it had backed off and then we surged again towards the top. And it did get really hard towards the top, not least because I decided to put in a silly attack. Now, on the descent, I know the descent of the Saisies quite well, and I was really comfortable staying just behind the group, keeping people at arm's length, but kind of enjoying the descent, knowing that I knew it. And it's a really fast, sweeping descent to begin with, but then it turns into a bit of like a pedaling descent. You know, you don't really gain top speed unless you push on with a bit of impetus. So getting to the bottom of this descent, we had averaged a pretty significant average speed up until this point, way faster than I thought we would. But this was when I saw Charlie and had my first feed. Now, because of the issue with losing my water bottle early on, I decided that I would actually ration the one bottle that I had of 500 ml of 60 grams of carbs and just try and manage over the first 90 minutes to 2 hours to ride on one bottle. A little bit of a risky move, but we finally got to Charlie.
Feed done, private feed done, that's my job done for the day. I can now go and hide somewhere quietly and wait for him to finish.
Now she did an excellent bottle handoff, one that actually you haven't done in years, have you? Like, it's been a good few years since you've done a bottle handoff, and like I always used to have one in racing when Charlie was there, but this one was going to be a bit risky because we hadn't practiced it. But you just got to hold it by the lid. You never hold it by the bottle because you're just never going to grab the bottle because someone's hand's going to come with it. You hold it by the top. And we actually had 2 gels, elastic banded around the bottle, which then I could take. And I think one was a caffeine gel, and I took that on straight away because I knew that the Col du Pré that was coming up would be a pretty significant part of this whole course. And from the people I've spoken to who did the event and survived the day, even they said the Col du Pré was a magnificent climb with great views, but it was so steep, it was just savage. I completely suffered on this climb. Like, I really, really dug myself into a place where I knew I had to try and stay with the biggest size group as possible because this is the penultimate climb effectively. We've got a little bit more to do before we descend into Borg and then do the final climb. But I knew that I had to try and do my best to stay with the front for as long as possible. So I noticed now the group, because of the descent, and because maybe people didn't know the descent, the group had now shrunk at the bottom of the Col du Pré to maybe 20 riders, whereas it was about 30 at the top of the Saisies. So the Col du Pré is a 12.5 kilometre climb, and it goes up in 2 sections. The second section is by far the hardest, and it averages about 9% for probably around 7 kilometres. There's lots of switchbacks, but again, it's really beautiful. And again, it took us about 42 minutes of 320 watts, which is another significant effort, quite close to, well, what I can pretty much sustain. I'm on my limit or close to it. And we're climbing at a really high pace. We're doing around 1300 VAM, which, it's not world tour level, but it's a significant pace. 1300, 1400 VAM is quite fast for a climbing speed. And this is helped by the steep gradient. So I'm plugging away on this climb and it explodes pretty much with about 6 kilometers to go. But the whole time I can see the front. And in my head, I'm just like, as long as I can see the front, it's okay. As long as I can see the front, it's fine. And me and one other rider who just basically did all the work for the next 3 or 4 kilometers, although like I couldn't really help if I wanted to. We were basically just plugging away and keeping them at a distance. And then eventually we were like, our luck changed. And as we crested the top of the Pré, before the little twisty descent, there was a headwind. And so the group just sat up and they didn't want to push into the headwind, or at least nobody wanted to exert themselves and give everyone else a free ride, which is fair enough. And we actually just managed to make it back to the front group of what must have been about 8 riders at this point. We managed to enjoy the descent into the reservoir, I guess, before I was then going to have my second feed of the day. Now, Alp Cycles had Benny stood up on the little kicker as you come up out onto the main road, onto the Cormet to Roselend, and I managed to grab a bottle from there, and things were going well. Like, I was sitting pretty. I felt, now I've legitimately made it to pretty much the top now of the Cormet. I've just got to make sure I can hang on for the next 5 or 6 kilometers to the very top, and then we're looking good. Like, we've just got a long descent in the Borg, through the valley for a little bit, and then up the Plagne to finish. And at the moment, my top 15 place is looking good, because coming to the top of the Cormet, you know, which does drag on, but again, we had a headwind. So as long as you were sitting in the wheels, you're okay, although it did start to get a little bit spicy at one point. I thought to myself, this is a chance. This is a chance now. I'm legitimately in this group, and I think I belong here now. And so we crested the Roselend with about, I would say, 13, 14 of us in the group. A couple more joined us as we did the first part of the descent, because it was a block headwind. There's some fantastic views on that descent, by the way, like really enjoyable descent. Big, wide open start to it. And then eventually you get down to the bottom, past Johan Brunel corner, which I knew too well, so I didn't take any risks on it, where he crashed in the 90s. I think it was the 90s. And then we got into the switchbacks at the bottom, or near the bottom, because once you get through the switchbacks, it goes dead straight and fast right into Borg. And I had a bit of a moment in those switchbacks. And I was okay up until probably the last 2 or 3 switchbacks, where I had this little bit of a brain fart. When I came around one of the corners, there's such steep hairpins that when you come round them, they kind of have this effect of like slingshotting you out. And as I was exiting, I nearly went quite close to the edge, and it kind of spooked me a little bit. And then when I came out of it, we're just straight into the next hairpin. And when you kind of lose your momentum like that, I didn't feel like I got it back. And the problem was then we got onto that dead straight section, and at that point the gap was just a little bit too big for me to close. We'd all reached terminal velocity, and I was kicking myself that like group of 15-ish was now in front of me going into Borg, and we were going to go through the valley, which is going to be quite, well, easy. It was going to be slightly downhill, nice run into the final climb. I wasn't in that group. And I came through Borg, and there was some great support on the side of the road at that point. And I was like, right, do I just nail myself now out of this little town to try and get into this group? Or do I just try and ride conservatively to the bottom, and then just try and set like a pretty good pace up the Plagne and hope I catch people? Well, I did a bit of both. However, me going hard out of Borg didn't really work. And so all that happened was I could just see the group like 40 seconds, 30 seconds ahead of me for like 5 kilometers. And I never got back to them. And I was even breaking all the UCI rules by, you know, doing the puppy paws on my handlebars to try and gain some time. And I was just looking at the distance, and there were some points where they weren't cooperating and they were easing up, and I was getting closer, and then other points where they were starting to rotate again, like in a chain gang, like in a breakaway. And I was like, oh no, like they're actually getting together and working. So long story short, get to the bottom of the Plagne, and I'm on my own. So I then hit my next Alp Cycles feed, the final one, with 500 meters into the Plagne climb, and Adi hands me a bottle and he says, do you want anything else? No, I'm fine, just this bottle will do. I've basically done the whole ride on bottles with carbs and gels. That's it, pretty much. Because the Sturka stuff works really well for me. Like, I know they partner with me and they sponsor me, but it's the only stuff that I've used over the last couple of years that's actually settled and worked with me as well as I wanted to. And he shouted at me, he said, just 17k to go. And I was like, thank you for that. that's a long way. Now, I actually held pretty well on this climb. I set into a pace that I thought was a good pace. However, I always feel like, and you might feel this as well, you know, it's all relative, the speed that we all climb at. We're all different. But when you climb on your own, you settle into a rhythm and you always feel like, this is as hard as I can go. This is all I can do. But actually, if you're riding with someone, you always feel like you can push yourself a bit more. I'm pretty sure we can all relate to that, right? So I settled into a rhythm, and for the next 10k, because the plan was about 15.3k, and it took me 56 minutes at 284 watts. So it's a fair drop off in terms of wattage. Well, it's a fair drop off in terms of what I was doing all day up until that point. And I think I got into this headspace where I was like, I've just got to settle in now and make sure I can maintain this to the top. And about 10k to go, I still felt strong. I still felt in control. But then I did start to waver slightly, and definitely with 6 or 5 kilometers to go, I was really in the hurt locker at that point. And you know, I didn't want to drink anymore. I was getting a little bit like, I'm over this now. I just want to get to the top. And again, I'm sure we've all been there, but at some point it does kind of hit you. And so at that point, I didn't have anyone to really race against. And all day I'd had people to push myself against. And mentally, I was just starting to let things slip. And I thought, like, when I caught 2 people on the climb, one after the other, they'd pretty much blown properly. Like, I caught them really quick. And then I got caught by, I think it was 4 riders in a group, and they caught me pretty quick. and then it was like a case of like leapfrogging people. So eventually I came in and finished 18th, so just 3 places off my target. But to be honest, the performance, you know, which I mentioned at the start of this video, you know, my overall performance of the day was like way above, I think, what I could have hoped for. Even though I knew it would require, you know, a really good ride for myself. I was really pleased that the performance was at a good level, or a very good level for what I was capable of doing. And to be honest, I think if I'd been with the front group at the end, and there's no excuses, like, you know, my concentration lapsed on that descent, and I got the hairpin wrong, and then there was a gap, and then I couldn't close the gap. But if I was in the front group, I would like to think, I certainly like to think that I could have, you know, dug myself a bit deeper to try and hold, you know, the wheels of the people around me. I definitely wouldn't have, you know, contested the win, you know, if that's what you want to call the win. Of course, we are competing. We are competing to a certain extent, I suppose. But looking at like my performances over the climbs of the event, my VAM was really good. My climbing speed was good for most of the climbs, where I was able to keep up with the big dogs. And then the last climb, you know, my VAM had dropped a little bit, which of course, you know, is down to my power dropping as well, right? So 285 watts for the final climb. If I'd have managed to squeeze out, you know, something similar to the previous climbs, something around 320, 315, 320, 325, that would probably have got me inside that top 15. But when we hit that final climb with 3,500 kilojoules and we did that 1 hour effort, I pretty much pushed myself to the limit by the end of it, and I was ready to finish. But I have to say, it was a fantastic day. I enjoyed every single second of it. I think, you know, it was a fantastically organized day. You know, the route was incredible. I loved every single meter of the route. And, you know, the descents, the climbs, the weather was good because it wasn't super hot. It was like 24 degrees max. But the support on the side of the road was impeccable. You know, I know this is supposed to be a mass participation amateur event, Etape de Tour. It's a stage of the tour, of course, but the amount of people that were out cheering for us, and the people who are out in their campers, you know, a week before the Tour de France comes, and they were getting ready for the race, they were fully embracing and supporting every single one of the people who were suffering, you know, up that final climb. You know, we all were suffering. It's all relative, isn't it? Like, the relatable thing of this sport is that we all suffer to improve and to get better and to improve our times, and there's an element of enjoyment in it as well, or satisfaction. So, you know, that's a big part of it. You know, the finishing times, everyone's a winner because they all, you know, you finish. It's like you got the medal, you collapsed at the line, hopefully, you know, with a smile on your face, and, you know, you had a great day. Again, it'd be awesome if you could support this channel, support the video, give it a like, see if we can get to 3,000 likes. for 30,000 subscribers. And like I said, I'll do some kind of wacky challenge video. I don't know what that'll be yet, but you know, it gives me some time to think about it at least. Next up for me in about a month's time is going to be Haute Route Alps. So that'll be a week-long, multi-day event, but something to look forward to nonetheless. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.